Hello and welcome to another week of the War Report. Now, it's a very special week. I remember this week last year, we're covering the wonderful UN General Assembly, among other stories. But of course, this takes the cake for tonight. I usually put my biggest story towards the back, but there's just only a few I want to cover, so I figure we'll just start out with it. So, of course, we'll start out with none other than one Donald Trump, who gives a speech at the UN. Now, unlike last year, he didn't brag about the GDP and unemployment of various X, Y, or Z group. Like he did last year, which he was welcomed with the laughter, which I'm still not sure whether it was at what he was saying or just his mannerisms. But point being, and he's had the look on his face, like, well, I wasn't expecting that, but okay. This year managed to be a little bit worse. And 2017, not that it was anything spectacular. It was probably his best UN speech so far. But his main topics is the fact that he really keeps on pushing this thing that, oh, we're going to fight the decriminalize homosexuality, and we will protect people worldwide on the basis of their sexual orientation. Goes on that line he's been pushing for about the past 6 months now. To his credit, he attacks open borders, saying, "Oh, we can't have open borders and mass migration. This is a threat to our sovereignty. This is a threat to every nation's sovereignty." Sort of invoking the situation in Europe. And the last one, which just seems sort of empty because it's just so irrelevant in the 21st century, talking about how socialism and communism have always failed and will never succeed. Which, again, it's like this. You're not Ronald Reagan going up against the uh, dying Soviet Union. This isn't the Cold War. I mean, what China is communist in name and kind in some of their central planning. But point being is, I don't know where he was going with that because invoking communism, it's like it shows how stuck in the '80s someone like a Donald Trump would be. But it was a middling speech. It was nothing I found too egregious, but it just kind of yawned. But we have to cover it because, of course, it's Trump. But the main reason, the main thing that caught my ear was the Rainbow Crusade that he's proposing again, which it hasn't taken off yet. He keeps on saying this, and oh, every nation is welcome to join in. Has even the most liberal, UK or France, even joined into this yet?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's regrettable that he has to push or maybe he wants to push the global homo line. I mean, Peter Thiel supported him, but um, I also noticed similar rhetoric to his 2017 speech and to other speeches where he denounces globalization and so on, and uh, strongly implies, nationalism of some kind or another, that no country is, safe without it, that their sovereignty can't be, guaranteed without it. That if you want to have freedom, you have to love your country, in order to achieve that. That was all great and everything, and I'm not sure I'm going to apply like a John Mearsheimer take on this when John Mearsheimer um, compares liberalism to nationalism and what he forecasts in the future. But I think Trump is appealing to his base when he talks like that, and next year is going to be the campaign year. Um, so I didn't know this year whether he was going to sort of reiterate in a new way what he was saying on his campaign trail and his last UN speech. But at the moment now, I mean, this is all it's all hollow. I mean, he demonstrates, for instance, how strong America is, and the most powerful. I'm the president of the most powerful nation on earth, and but he's talking about nationalism and
Yeah,
like
he wants to play
America
seed a
routinely
global
interfered.
empire, but
Yeah, yeah. So again, it's ridiculous. I mean, if he loves nationalism so much and every country being able to determine, what their futures are, you know, should he be putting more sanctions on Iran? I mean, the animal still behaves like a empire. It doesn't behave really like a nation state, and so you know. But I think we've all lost a certain amount of naivete from 2016. Nobody really expects some kind of a nationalism that didn't even exist. It's still going to be uh, about bigger countries being able to determine policies for smaller countries and how their interests win out in the end, and so on and so on.
You know,
But
I have to say I don't even so much mind like sort of like the imperialism that has existed all throughout human history. It's I question more of like tactics than anything. Like for example, the where we go and what we're trying to do. For example, a country like Russia is arguably imperialistic, but their imperialism is seizing Crimea, messing around in Georgia, stuff in Central Asia, stuff in the Middle East, like propping up Syria. It's like stuff that you can see an actual direct benefit to them that doesn't take years upon years for some supposed benefit to come up. And like yeah, controlling Crimea beneficial to Russia, having seaports in the Mediterranean beneficial to Russia, keeping things in check in Georgia, a bordering country, beneficial to Russia. Same with China. Like their moves in the South China Sea are, I would say, in the most academic sense, imperialistic. But it's actually going to benefit China in both the short and the long run. Where it was when America slapped sanctions on Iran, it's like you're only doing this because of ideological reasons and because your allies in the region are angry about this, and you're kissing the ring to Saudi Arabia and Israel because they're afraid of Iran. So it's not so much as like the
right.
throwing around a weight. Like it's like yeah, it's inevitable. You're gonna have to do it at some point. It's just the way we do it and how we do it and the reasons we picked to do it.
Right, and you can see this kind of trajectory of empire, even with what's occurring with Brexit and just the state of the UK. Meaning, um, so England itself doesn't have its own court or parliament. Of course, Scotland does, and they're both funded by taxpayers in England, right? The presumption being that England, in a sense, when it became Great Britain and the United Kingdom, um, lost this sort of sovereignty. You know, so you see the same thing at play, where now when you become an empire, this so many obligations on a global level that it's hard to imagine how America is going to retract from this. The rhetoric is still there. I'm convinced it's there for his reelection. I do think, though, there is an element within American politics with some theoreticians that speculate what the trajectory will be of China and the influence will be shifting to the east. So, and we've talked. I mean, that's a common theme on our show. That is, some kind of nationalism actually will have to reemerge, right? Because the nationalism itself is a consequence of the retraction of empire. So,
Yeah, and I actually pointed out, not to get on too much of a tangent, that Spain is a really good example for this. They're one of the first imperial powers. 1492. They come in throughout the 1500s, colonize it. As the Napoleonic Wars roll around, late 18th, early 19th century, they begin to lose their imperial holdings. They eventually cut off a lot of them, keep them until the Spanish-American War, lose a couple, and then you get as the end result of that Franco, who I would say, unfortunately, didn't do enough to solidify his regime beyond his own lifespan. But again, not to get off on too much tangent, but I think Spain's actually a pretty good example of how to peacefully end an empire without destroying your nation. Not that Spain's in the best state today, but I think the point stands.
mhm. Yeah, yeah, very much so. I think we're still a long ways off from that, but
Yeah,
I mean,
I have
there's a lot to
my
get
own
into,
theories,
and I
but
think, yeah, but I think the last 2 days, in a way, attest to this continuing trend. It can't be ignored anymore.
now
So,
to continue, I will say, what I liked best about his speech? Actually, what he didn't say. You notice what he didn't mention? Iran or Syria. He didn't go. I mean, he did that the past two
mm,
times, saying, "Oh, we must stop Iran from building a bomb. We will use sanctions. We will force them to come to the negotiating table whenever they're ready, or blah, 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 or we will be tough on Iran, or
yeah,
we'll make sure Syria doesn't use chemical weapons or go into Idlib." That rhetoric was absent. Now that's probably more so not Trump's like change of heart or his staff's change of heart, but more
mhm,
so a realistic look at the situation. It's like it's not even worth bringing up. We kind of lost this battle already, so just sweep it under the rug.
Yeah, definitely. It seems like it's a battle lost. The whole um, you know the this the failed kind of, I don't know, like thought revolution that was supposed to take place in Iran didn't happen. You had those pictures of a middle-aged woman like with her top off. Like, it was just ridiculous.
Like
I mean,
the really cringy like sort of regime change, not like the sort of regime change where we
yeah,
just hired a bunch of military officers to take up the government. We decided we need street performers to take that role now in the new liberal era.
right. So it that didn't work. A lot of the regime changes aren't happening. Venezuela, uh, Maduro is visiting Moscow. I mean, we can get into that too, but I guess as long as we're on the topic of the UN speeches, Jinping and Putin are not there.
Yeah, I mean,
And of
Putin
course,
swore off the UN after 2015 after his involvement in Syria, saying, "Look, I had to get involved in Syria because you all failed, and I want nothing to do with you." Beyond keeping Russia there for status and veto power, Russia's effectively left the UN.
yeah, I think that you could have that argument, definitely. I think China not being there is also very significant. Maduro was there, I'm pretty sure, last year, and he's not going there. Of course, Russia and him have a something like a $5 billion deal with the oil, and that's still going on even after the scare that Maduro was going to be assassinated early on in the year, where he thought he had to flee to Cuba. But yeah, I think Russia calming him down and saying, the situation is under control. It does seem to bear itself out that way.
Now, I will make a recommendation to the audience in terms of everything we just discussed. In anticipation, unfortunately, failed anticipation of Colonel Douglas McGregor becoming National Security Advisor, I've been listening to a lot of his stuff lately. Brilliant man, especially on the topic of foreign policy, military history, everything like that. And I listen to these things, and pretty much everything he said about 6 months ago in terms of like the Venezuela stuff and a lot of the Iran, Syria, and Russia stuff, all his predictions have panned out. But not to get off on too much of a tangent. Now, of course, the U.S. and Iran didn't meet, which I'm not surprised that Trump and Rouhani didn't meet. But just to move on from that, there's a couple other UN speeches I wanted to cover. So Macron is actually moving to posture himself, as we've been discussing on the show, sort of trying to set France aside from the American-led order and trying to almost create a parallel liberal order in a sense. It's a bit odd.
Yeah.
Of course, we've been monitoring the situation for since the beginning of the show. Macron really is trying to do that. Oh, I'm the Jupiterian president thing. Oh, and now his main points are, in a strange way, the former banker puppet himself called out capitalism more so just like the surface level, like what you hear from like a Bernie bro. It's like, oh, it doesn't do enough to guarantee equality, but nothing substantial, nothing that you would really hear from any legitimate criticisms of capitalism. He also says that Iran will not get a nuclear bomb, that the Gulf will be patrolled, so he's sort of on board with the thing that he rejected a few months back. He said the Yemen crisis will be ended by negotiations, and I would say above all, this is what he's been pushing for months. We need to lift sanctions on Iran. So it was nothing less than expected. It does
Yeah.
harken back to his speech last year. Granted, the speech last year had a bit of irony, like when he's like, "Oh, we need neutral arbiters in the Israel-Palestine conflict, not countries that call themselves neutral, like the United States." Whereas within the same week, he was bombing Syria along with Israeli forces.
Yeah.
But that was more of a that was funny. Now, Macron has also realized that the West has lost in Syria, and I would say, look, I actually over the past few months have gained a odd respect for him, which you'll see when we talk about Erdogan as well, where it's like I detest everything he stands for, but hot damn is he an effective leader, at least in the terms of the world stage. Now, his own country, he could do a lot better. I mean, we had 32 weeks of protests based on that. But point being is positioning France on the world stage going into the 21st century, finishing out the 21st century over the coming 8 decades. he's doing a pretty good job in repositioning his country.
Yeah, there's a few things that that I'm happy he's mentioned. He did recognize the Armenian genocide, and finally, he's come out and said it that France too is an Amazonian country. Did you hear this? He told Bolsonaro he's never recovered after Bolsonaro. So he's told Bolsonaro that French Guyana shares a border even larger than it does with Spain. What are you saying? And it's a full part of France. It's not even like semi-autonomous. French, France is an Amazonian country. Yes, I'm going to take interest, damn it, in the rainforest. He also decried Greta because Greta essentially, singled him out as one of the leaders who'd failed. And even though he invited and Greta visited him less than a year ago, but she turned on him. She turned on him.
You know, I do have to say on a complete side note, that kid Thunderberg or whatever, I'm starting to like her just as an agent of chaos, just because she, uh, everywhere she goes, chaos ensues. So I kind of like that.
Yeah. Maybe you're too young to remember, but if anyone remembers the movie Dune by David Lynch with the little Bene Gesserit girl, she reminds me of that Bene Gesserit girl. Like any moment, she's gonna mention the Katazagarat or whatever. The cat Razagad is gonna save planet Earth. Um, yeah, I mean, she looked like she was having a mental breakdown. I mean, she's young,
And also, I believe
and
has some sort of impairment. I think they said Asperger's or autism. But point being is, anyone with half a brain knows that she's a mouthpiece for um, whoever's putting it up. Now, it's most likely just the neoliberals who want like the band-aid solutions, as Fascist Zizek said to the environmental problems, like, oh, if we just impose a carbon tax, if we just fly and drive less, things will be solved, and want to offer no real sensible solutions to the problem. So, yeah,
yeah. So, to me, Greta represents like liberals and leftists who have a visceral reaction to Trump. In a sense, she embodied all of them. And I think that's why she gets so much support. I think that, in a sense, is really what she's there for, rather than the environment. The world is going to end in 12 years. Really,
like one can only
all of this.
hope.
Yeah, thank God. I wish. Um, you can't get. You wanted to see 12 years of steady trenchiness in Greece. I don't. Um, you, you know, let's say for whatever reason Trump is actually impeached or he's not reelected. Um, all of these policies will either they won't garner the same kind of interest. Of course, the policies will probably go through because the left, pragmatically, like on a practical level, wins, even if they sometimes lose rhetorically to the right. But it won't be a concern. It will sort of disappear from the ears and eyes of people paying attention to to climate change. However, that's not really her purpose. Her purpose is there to act as a kind of a lightning rod to Blumph. That incredible moment where he walks out of one room and she's behind him and she's just scowling.
You know who she reminds me of in terms of also using like the child prop things?
Mhm.
One, Bana Alabed. Now, for those of you unfamiliar,
Yeah.
those of you just tuning in, She is the 8-year-old Syrian girl who's been 8 for the past decade, talking about how, oh, I need help. We must save my country. I don't care if it starts World War III. We have to save Aleppo. That was the one she was really big in 2016. A lot of the neocons who really didn't like Trump really hammered on that. I'm surprised she wasn't at like some like Hillary rally. I'm surprised they didn't fly her in from Turkey for that. Granted, you look at the picture of her, like she's with I think her father and uncles, like her uncles, are Al Qaeda fighters. So
Yeah, yeah,
it reminded me of that, of course, on a smaller scale. But I suppose you could say she's the eco-fascist Bana Alabed.
yeah. She's definitely an eco-fascist. I mean, she's Swedish. What more do you want? Um, so yeah, I mean, but of course, Erdogan's speech was also very interesting.
Oh
You
boy,
could
I'm glad
probably.
glad you brought that up. So Erdogan actually went after both Israel and India. Now he almost in Netanyahu fashion, ironically enough, had a little poster with him of the Israel-Palestine conflict, and the green represented the Palestinians, white represent the Israelis. I'm sure we've all seen it, showing from 1947 to present day. And he's like pointing, he's like, "Where is Israel? Where is Israel here? Why are the borders so ill-defined? Look at between 1947 and 1967." So it was the typical like anti-Zionist, pro-Palestinian rhetoric. Not anything that really offends me or is like, "Oh, it's so brave and so great that he's standing up against it." But it implies something bigger. So you'll remember, some of you will remember, that during the 2016 coup attempt in Turkey, when Erdogan was actually flying back into the country, flying back to the city, he was given an internet connection to do the broadcast from his iPhone by the Israelis. Now, I'm not sure whether that was confirmed, but there's heavy reason to believe that
Hmm.
the Israelis gave him the internet connection in order to make his broadcast, to make his like a victory speech. Oh, the usurpers have been overcome. I am Erdogan, and I will rule Turkey until the day I die. That sort of speech he gave. But it implies a shift. You've seen, especially how he's been going to the Sochi summits, and the most recent summit they had in Turkey, with him meeting with the Iranians and the Russians, and even the French and the Germans have been involved in some of those summits. But you can tell that sort of his parting ways with Israel, because they've always had one of those behind closed doors relationships, similar to how Israel and Saudi Arabia are. But him parting ways with Israel in that sense is indicative of a larger shift of him just moving his country eastward. I mean, if you break up with Israel, you break up with America. That's just how it is.
Right. I mean, there's several reasons why he wants to do this, but we should also put in a historical context. Erdogan has lambasted Israel many times over the past few years, including, the fiasco with the ship sending relief to Gaza. There were a number of people that were killed when the Israelis intercepted the ship. Um, so this has been going on for quite a while. I think with Erdogan, he also came out very strongly against the semi-autonomous Kurdish state in Iraq. Um, it
And
had
Israel
some
was the
kind of.
only sovereign state to support that one.
That's right, and I think he foresees a major problem going forward with the Kurds in Syria because they are next door. Um, Not that northern Iraq is that far from Turkey; it's not. But
It's in like
north
the
of the
mountainous,
Euphrates,
remote part.
right? Yes, yes. So technically, yes, but they're not going to be traveling through there, and it's a very small and difficult corridor. What he's really worried about is the Kurds in Syria and them achieving the same kind of autonomy uh, in Syria. So you know. Um, I think Erdogan. One of the reasons why he's come over to the Russian side is he sees that because there was no decisive American victory during the Obama years, that he had actually been on the wrong side, and so I think the rhetoric against Israel is also fomented because of Israel's support, and in a sense, as you say, criticism of Israel is also criticism of America. Because they're best buds. And so, The other thing is he's brought up Kashmir, the situation with Pakistan and India, and how that needs to be a resolution. Now, this is a really interesting development because I just want to contextualize it briefly with the Shanghai Accord. Now, the Shanghai Accord is getting larger and larger, and it now has a distinctive military component. China and Russia, again, had these enormous military drills. I believe it was even bigger than the last one that they had a year or two ago. And well, guess who also participated in this? India and Pakistan. And we'd been forecasting probably since 2017 that as China makes a greater influence, that there would be troubles for Pakistan and its coast because there is now going to be, that trade route around India from the Pacific towards the Arabian Sea, the Sea of Oman, and so on, right? But that hasn't happened. Pakistan has been able to quell any kind of, sectarian or minority disputes within Pakistan. So it still hasn't been destabilized. Uh, if we see greater participation between India and Pakistan, I think you're going to see a very worried America, Israel, and Britain, but especially America. And so him bringing up Kashmir in a way implies, I think, what the consequences of that might be for the Shanghai Agreement. And Iran is being also possibly courted to join the Shanghai Agreement. So I just thought I'd mention that.
I want to continue on your India point a little bit before we get off the UN stuff. Now, Trump actually had Modi come to one of his campaign rallies during a state visit. I believe it was over the weekend, and it was in Houston, Texas, talking about, we love India, and India's our new best friend, and a lot of people were rightly so commenting about, like, oh yeah, it looks like Trump's giving out more HB1 visas right to the stores, but jokes.
Right. Well, didn't he mention it in the speech? We've never had so many minorities.
Yeah, yeah.
Great. You're dispossessing more white males. Thank you so much, Plump.
Oh yeah, all those angry white men who voted for Blump. It looks like he's really doing them good. But
Yeah.
it was interesting watching how India is sort of in this tug of war. They've almost been put in the same position Turkey has, where yeah, they have the entire world in their hands. They can call up any major world power, have them on the phone, say, "Look, I want this, this, and this," or I'll go to Moscow or whatever. So it is
Hmm.
India definitely keep your eye on. Besides the flare from Pakistan, which really died down the situation in Kashmir. Um, Superpower 2020 maybe a few years off, but might not necessarily be too as much as joke we've been making it out to be. India's in a position where if they, I mean, look, if they play their cards right now, they could be a major power going forward.
Right. I mean, they're going to be an influence. Like, uh, I doubt that in 20 years they're going to reach the level of, say, China. The region is just not big enough for two powers of that level. I also think that, in a sense, that China's ability to stay whole is maybe a little works a little differently than the way it does for India, and that India has, I don't know. I think India's ability to stay intact depends on other things, and it depends on, say, it doesn't have the super state centralization the way China does,
Oh yeah, it's
and
still very federalized, despite the fact that one of Modi's key things has been trying to centralize power to the federal government and sort of turn into almost a imperial system, you could say. But
yeah,
yeah, that's the thing. Where
there's a laissez, yeah, there's a laissez-faire tradition, and that is what stops it from, having um, other regions break off. I mean, the Sikhs for decades have wanted their own autonomous state. There's other states that are like that, but it's the federalization that, in and of itself, is both feeding some of that, some of those separatist ideas, but at the same time, it stops it from them actually enacting it. Um, India going towards a strong centralized authority, the kind that exists in China, I don't see that happening. And as long as that doesn't happen, I don't see the country being able to plan out, to map out its future the way China did in the 70s and 80s. Because the China we see today is a result of this long range planning, this highly centralized um, governmental power that forecasts a vision. I don't see anything like that happening for India.
Yeah, I would definitely agree. As if India does try to centralize and sort of create a base of power, follow the Chinese model, if you will, that's ripe for foreign-funded separatism, whether that be by the U.S., China, Russia. I mean, you could see the
Mhm.
U.S. coming out, maybe not coming out directly, but we could see moderate Sikh rebels rise up in India, or any of the various ethnic
Yeah,
and religious groups. It's the country's,
or the Tamils,
yeah, the country's an anomaly in fact how
the
it stays together.
Nagal, the southern part.
Yeah, definitely.
Right.
But and one of Modi's one of the big concern about him is that he wanted to go towards a centralized model, and the way I see it is they're probably going to play it safe. That in India in general, no matter who the leader is, probably going to play it safe and just keep their secondary status and sort of pivot back and forth between the major powers. Again, similar to a Turkey. Granted, like I said, Erdogan, Turkey is a centralized state, so they have a bit more influence in that regard. But that's beyond the point. Let's move on to the Trump Zelensky phone call that you've been hearing all about. Now, of course, I've
Mhm.
noticed a hesitation for some reason to even utter the name Zelensky, whether it be by the U.S. media, the Western media, or even by just independent commentators online. It seems like nobody wants to like. I mean, it seems like nobody even knows who Zelensky is. He's just the president of Ukraine. He's just the leader of Ukraine. And they had a phone call. Now, as most of you probably know, the impetus for this phone call is Trump was trying to lean on Ukraine, putting pressure on them, saying, "Look, we need your help in this corruption investigation involving Joe Biden and his family." And Trump has pretty much agreed to release the transcripts. Now, people are calling this collusion with a foreign state, like Pelosi's talking about. Oh, we're considering going forward with an impeachment. All the normal hubbub of domestic politics, but I do think it's a bit weird they want to go forward with that. I mean, is this the first time the United States ever put pressure on a smaller country in its sphere? Not that Ukraine's necessarily in our sphere, but might as well be. Yeah, this is the first time we've definitely leaned on a country to get them to cooperate with something that's beneficial to our political class. Never happened in the history of the country before. But the reason I find this so hilarious is just that Zelensky cannot catch a break, whether it's just his election general coming off of Poroshenko and the crisis in Ukraine, whether it's the mass emigration from the country, whether the situation in Donbass and with what Russia's doing, whether it's Germany pretty much throwing his country on the bus, like we'll discuss later, having to do with the Donbass Ukraine situation and in Russia, or whether it's a multitude of things. Zelensky cannot catch a break, and I expected his leadership, his presidency, to go like this. That he would be faced with crisis after crisis, and that he would ultimately do more for the Russian cause just by being an inept leader. Because again, the man is a former comedian elected by a disgruntled country. But you almost got to feel bad for him that after everything, the man's only been in office since May. All of a sudden, Trump decides to throw his hat in the ring and say, "Hey, Zelensky, I'm going to make your life just a little bit harder. I'm just going to make Ukraine's life a little bit harder."
Right. And, but I think one thing that we should keep in mind is that Ukraine was ignored during during the investigation into into Trump the last 3 years and so on of collusion. However, Ukraine was pretty central to this whole thing. Now, one of the reasons why they couldn't be explicit about it, there's several, and some of it is that the oligarchs, for decades, people talk about Russian oligarchs and Ukrainian oligarchs, and who are they? And they're running like But there's a bit of a problem because a lot of them are Jewish, or the majority of them are Jewish, and so they can't openly speak about it.
And of course, just to clarify
Number
for those overlords at YouTube headquarters, we do indeed love the Jewish people in the state of Israel, and we think it's a good thing that they're so successful in these Eastern European countries in which they've just been so historically persecuted, and it's good to see them get ahead for once.
Yeah, definitely. Um, so there is so the way this whole thing kind of ties in is Giuliani visiting back in 2014 and in 2017 a guy by the name of I kid you not, his name is Fox, and so he is located in Kharkiv, eastern Ukraine. There was a short period of time that was part of it was under the rebels' control. Of course, the rebels call it Kharkov. So he was asked by Fuchs to basically Giuliani was hired to give advice on amongst other things a Holocaust memorial in Kharkiv. But it's obvious that there was more going on, and he apparently had met with the mayor of Kharkiv, who was shot by a sniper and left partially paralyzed. And so why wasn't this? But there are other reasons why a lot of this wasn't fleshed out, and it is now going to have to be fleshed out to some degree, more than it was during the collusion scandal. And that is, while yes, Manafort was working for him, and Giuliani was in contact with some of these elements, like the mayor of Kharkiv. Of course, on record, what they were saying, he was doing a great job of protecting Kharkiv from the Russians, the rebels. Then it gets very convoluted because one of the former members of Yanukovych's party, of course, he was ousted. Now, Manafort did deals with the party. However, that was in 2016, and Yanukovych fled in 2014. Well, the part, so some of the liberal media, like Mother Jones, is trying to imply, well, it's still his party. It's like, well, no, after a leader is literally ousted, even though he was democratically elected, that party cannot function the way it did, because literally their lives would be on the line. So you're going to have these strange situations that, during the Maidan, some of the oligarchs, of course, were on the side that the Westerners were on. That the Maidan, liberal, more democracy movement was trying to, win. So it's not very clear, and so they still depend on these tropes: oligarch, Russian. Those words, those buzzwords are supposed to be enough. And
yeah, it's supposed to make you invoke the hellhole '90s Russia and Eastern Europe with all the mobsters running the show.
Right. But they can't get too explicit about exactly what happened, right?
Yeah.
Some of these things happened in 2014. Well, Trump didn't announce in 2014 that he was running for president. So
far back as 2008, mind you. That's when the initial Manafort scandals go back to.
Right. And so, so he's probably dealing with Yanukovych at the same time. But, he's also dealing with oligarchs that wanted to see Yanukovych leave. You know what I mean? Of course, Poroshenko's staff was very upset by Trump. There were elements that wanted Trump to lose. They openly supported Hillary and petitioned for Hillary, during the run up to the election. So this is a very convoluted case. My only fear with Trump is that withholding the information and other technicalities might be enough to force him to leave. That they are going to. I mean, this was just announced a few hours ago. They are going to try to impeach him. They've finally done it, and I think this could be the straw that breaks the camel's back, even though it's flimsy and there was already a precedent for it. Nixon wasn't the first president that probably tried to steal information from from the other party, um, but it still cost him his presidency. So I'm actually I guess worried that Trump actually this time it might stick.
I can understand that concern. I mean, but we also have to remember it takes 2/3 of the Senate to impeach, and with how polarized things have become, I don't think even the most limp-wristed Mitt Romney Republicans, okay, maybe Mitt Romney, but even like the most limp-wristed Lindsey Graham Republicans would even risk that. But yeah, I can definitely understand the concern that they may drag this out and turn this into like an impeachment battle, impeachment scandal that completely makes him impotent, like to the point where he might as well not be president because he can't do a damn thing because of these several month long investigations. That's why I think they're trying to again sort of drag him to a mud, beat him in, I guess what you could call a war of attrition, rather than actually impeach him and remove him from office.
Right. I mean, whether he's impeached or not, on a daily level, what must occur through the media, and this is the entire Western media. So, this is the case in Canada. It's the same case in France and Britain. In any Western nation, Trump has to be delegitimized as being a president on a daily basis, right?
Yeah.
There's always at least one headline. Trump is lambasted for attacking Greta, a child. So that has to go on indefinitely until he finally
Correction.
leaves
It
office.
needs to go on definitely until he actually follows through on his warmongering. Don't you remember the first time he ever bombed Syria, the night he truly became president? Now, if he caves, if he gives them something big like that, what he
Yeah.
wants, the pressure will let up. But point being is, I understand what you're saying, and yeah, they're going to delegitimize him. They're pretty much going to turn him into an impotent lame duck by, if not impeaching him, dragging him into a day-to-day battle where he either spends all day on Twitter or lambasting Congress about presidential harassment, witch hunt, and no impeachment. And again, it will be as if he weren't even president. He's not going to be able to accomplish anything on any level. He's not going to be accomplishing anything on immigration, domestic policy, especially not foreign policy. He tries to talk to any country outside of what do you call it, the liberal world order.
Right.
They're going to burn him at the stake.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, some of the things that the Ukrainian politicians did during 2016 was, for instance, they planted this idea like Hunter Biden's position, of course, is it's speculative, but the company wasn't being investigated by anybody at that time. However, a lie was put about again by these oligarchs who, to some degree, like Trump, that Soros was behind this, and as far as I know, this is absolutely fabricated. So I'm just worried about how some of these things could come, will continue to erode and delegitimize him.
Oh yeah, I'm just saying I don't think they're going to go through with it, but it's going to be hell for him even throughout the election.
I agree
May
with you.
even cost him
I
the
think
election.
I think that's yeah. I think that's a very good take. The country is too polarized now, and every time an impeachment happens, there is like a significant deflation in people, in their morale and the way they feel towards their country. Uh, Very acute, I think, with Nixon. It took several years, I think, for like American morale to recover after that, especially after Vietnam. And you could argue that the beginning of the kind of culture war that we're having now, the polarization that we saw in the late '90s, with Clinton, and the impeachment that essentially failed, also created this deflation. If it hadn't been for 9/11, in some ways, that I think would have festered on and on.
Yeah, I mean,
And in a
people
way, it's
always point
always
out
been in
that
the background since then.
yeah, people always point out, oh, a failed impeachment does more to help the president. In the short term, in the long term, it becomes a blotch on the record. It becomes a scandal. I mean, even people who like Bill Clinton are like, oh yeah, that was a shit show. But it has a long term demoralizing effect, as you're saying, and maybe I'm going to sound a bit melodramatic here, but of all the things I thought would kneecap the empire, I figured it was going to be war with Iran or some other blusterous foreign policy decision or some blusterous immigration decision. It may actually be another just impeachment battle.
Yeah.
Now,
I think they don't see, like, I don't think they see a Democrat right now that could beat Trump. I think people will laugh, but I think Biden probably has the best chance. Ironically enough, like, I do think that would you agree that America is in such a state that if it came down to it, like, you would have a lot of Democrats mobilized to elect Biden, even if it's only 4 years, even if it only means getting rid of Trump as the only positive outcome.
yeah, Biden and like a progressive quote unquote running mate, I think that could be enough to eke it out. Now, as it stands now, just based on what we have now, I think Trump is going to be the one who ekes out. But point being is somebody will eke it out, and who at this point, who the hell knows? Now, to move on from that, speaking of late stage empire, the U.S. has agreed to move more troops and open up more bases in Poland. Now, just to give a bit of preface for this, the original stated purpose of NATO in 1949 was a nice little slogan. We're going to keep the Americans in, we're going to keep the Russians out, and we're going to keep the Germans down. And you could see we, for all intents and purposes, occupied potential rivals in Europe, mainly Germany, to a lesser extent Italy, and pretty much anywhere else we had a heavy military installation in Europe. But Germany and Italy, of course, being the biggest two. Now, we are moving to Poland. And of course, NATO is in the state of its existence after the fall of the Soviet Union, where it's constantly, on a day to day basis, trying to find a way to justify its own existence. But the way I see U.S. troops moving into Poland, Germany's been pacified. Italy, it's up in the air. We don't know what's going to happen, even though I think things are going to be well for them in the long run with some of the upheaval there. The new government making some very unpopular moves in terms of migration, taxation, all that kind of things. You're seeing Lega and FDI rise in the polls, but that's all aside the point. And the massive protests like 2 weeks ago. But Poland has been defiant to the liberal world order. Defiant to the same degree as Hungary, but Hungary played its card as well. It was willing to go outside of the European Union and Washington, seek partners in Russia, and even, strangely enough, Iran for Hungary, to the point where they put themselves in the middle of two axes. Poland has failed to do that. They've looked only to Washington in terms to look outside of Brussels, and it may come back to bite them. Now, we were talking about this off air. Now, the U.S. is going to move in under the pretext that we're defending our allies from Russian aggression, but you know that along with an increased U.S. presence comes increased spread of liberalism. We'll say, to put it lightly. Maybe we'll have some tolerance and diversity and some rainbow flag parades, as you were saying. But yeah, it's going to be a pretext in order to smuggle in the Rainbow Crusade.
Right. I think they would be happy to make them as compliant as Lithuania when it comes to this, or Estonia. Um, yeah, I mean, we've talked about this on the show previously. That Poland is stuck. It's unable to maneuver. It will have to cater to Trump. Its nationalism depends on, funnily enough, pretending that Poland and Trump are on the same page, and they're not. I mean, just all you have to do is listen to Trump's UN speech today, and if Poland thinks it's going to be overlooked for, the LGBTQ agenda, they're sorely mistaken. The EU has been unable, for various reasons, to get Poland to comply for several things, not just migration or quote unquote gay rights. Primarily because the EU is in trouble. I mean, we have Brexit going on. Brussels cannot afford to have a heavy hand placed over Poland. It simply is. Those are unacceptable optics, and that's one of the things that I think Orban realized very quickly.
Yeah, I
That
mean, let's look at just real quick everything on the table for the EU: Brexit, um, the chaos in Italy, trying to expand into the Balkans, the situation with Turkey, whatever the hell the relationship is with Russia, which changes from day to day. Yeah, they can't really spare any resources to tackle Poland. Now, I don't think that's an underestimate of Poland on their part. It's just the fact that too little, too late. Poland decided to come to it at the right time, arguably the same time as Hungary. I would just say Orban and Hungary have been smarter about it, but yeah, I definitely see where you're going with that one. And to say, like, in terms of Polish compliance, the one area they've been compliant with the empire on is being a military outpost.
yeah, yeah, they're happy to be a military outpost, but everything depends on Trump's whims, and whoever replaces Trump, whether it's next year or in 4 years, um, that agenda is going to be far stronger than it is right now. The pressure, I could, I could see that America moving in is actually doing Brussels work. Um, in order to get them to comply, because there were already rumblings. We talked about this in the last episode. There was a Polish politician that was wondering, like, is it still worth being in the EU and so on. I think they want to nip that in the bud, and Poland has made such an extravagant, you know, uh, display for Trump, and they've continued this rhetoric of, you know, we could be next after Ukraine, and everybody knows they're not next. However, that's worked for them, and now they literally have given the avenue for global homo to come in, and it's not going to work out very well for Poland.
Yeah, I would say so. My biggest hope for Poland is the government. Of course, they want to play this anti-Russia game so they can milk money out of the EU and NATO, but the Polish people, not like they don't have the troubled history with Russia, but I don't think they are as anti-Russia as their government is. I think, of course, a lot of their government's anti-Russia positions just so happen, of course, historical troubles and Western
Yeah,
pressures. I think they probably would have moved on the path of mending relations, like most former Eastern Bloc states have. I mean, Hungary is a good example. Bulgaria is another one. Of course, Belarus and never really fell out of the sphere, but Czech Republic and Slovakia even. But you're seeing a lot of these post-Soviet, post-Eastern Bloc states really, especially over the 2010s, decide, look, the past is the past. It's no longer the Soviet Union, and we're only harming ourselves by isolating Russia. Funny enough, you've had Western European countries such as Italy and even to a degree France, but again, Macron's game, who knows what he's playing, come to that conclusion before even Poland has. And again, I think Poland has come to that conclusion. It's just the fact that they're number one apprehensive to do it, number two, one hand tied behind their back. So not as easy as it looks, but point being is this upcoming Polish election will be in either October or November. We'll have to see how things go there. There's actually now the current party that rules Poland is pretty much just, oh, we are conservative, we're traditionalists, but we want money from the EU. We just want the EU to stop sending migrants. Whereas you're seeing a new party rise in Poland, similar to more of the Orban type, where it's like, yeah, we're going to be actually nationalistic instead of this nationalism light. So we'll have to see how that plays out. We'll have to see the direction Poland goes in. But I think for the most part, they've screwed themselves.
yeah, I would agree. I think also, if we bring in a little bit of um, theory into this equation, I would, using like Spengler's model of a philosophy of history. This often happens with groups that belong within a larger group, that there is a rivalry about who is going to determine um, how this sort of culture develops and might even develop into a unique civilization. And what I mean by this is that there's no question that the West begins with Germans, with Germanics, and then later you have other related Western Europeans, the French, the Spanish, and the British, who continue this. And part of Eastern European and Slavic history, of course, is that Poland was the first great Slavic empire in a sense. I know Moravia was first established, but that didn't last that long, and it wasn't such a large territory. However, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was, and of course, they even sacked Moscow. Um, I think that there's a rivalry between Russia and Poland, and it's obvious that in the last 150 years, Russia has won.
Yeah, I mean,
And
it is rivalry of who is the face, who is the seat of the Slavic people. Is it the
right,
Catholic Western Poles or is the Orthodox Eastern Russians? And it again,
that's absolutely,
I don't think it's a hatred
absolutely,
between the two. I think it's more of like an in family rivalry where they decide, no, I want to be the face
yes.
of the Slavs. No, I want to be the face of the Slavs. But at the end of the day, I think even on a subconscious level, they both realize they have much more in common on pretty much every level, whether that be civilizationally, militarily, economically, than Poland does with, for example, a Germany or France or a United Kingdom.
Right, and I was listening to a speaker on Arctos mention something. With the exception of Czech Republic, sometimes people wonder why, like the Slavs, you know, to a greater degree than Western Europeans, have managed to hang on to, their Christianity. I don't want to overstate it. I don't want to say, to imply that it's in a much greater condition than it is. However, um, that can be said. That general statement can be said that there is a difference, that they have held on to Christianity longer, and they're more likely to hold on longer going forward.
Yeah, just
And
to
with it,
bolster that statement, I saw a survey the other day that said 66% of Russian youth identified as some form of Christian, whether that was Orthodox, Catholic, any of the various Protestant. But point being, just Christian in general. I mean, yeah, 2/3 isn't like enough to be like a strong Christian nation, but compared to its friends in the West, like barring countries like Spain and Italy and some of these other southern European ones,
10%.
compared to northwestern Europe,
Yeah.
it's a miracle.
Right. Right. And what the speaker said in Arctos, I found very interesting, is in a sense, all Slavs are the sons of Cyril and Methody, and that is true. Even the Catholic ones, the Slovak Church venerates. Of course, they have a city named after them, Bratislava. So yeah. So I just wanted to say that there's a rivalry between Poland and Russia, and that may be one of the reasons why Poland has sought this protection, because it doesn't want to be absorbed into this sphere. Of course, a good chunk of Poland was part of the Russian Empire for a very, very long time. So yeah, I mean, even Dostoevsky had some Polish background. So
Yeah, we joked the other day, both on and off there, that your average Russian in Moscow has some Ukrainian or Polish ancestry. That, yeah. So it's definitely nothing unexpected. And like I said, I if they don't put
yeah,
their ego aside, if they really want to die on this hill, then it's not going to be pretty. Look, they can play second wheel in this sort of thing that you described, this broader Slavic civilization, or they can become a cog in the neoliberal West. Unfortunately, there's no third option. You could point to the Visegrad Group. It may buy them some time, but it's not going to become a pole in its, or a civilization in and of itself. It's going to be cooperative
definitely.
Central European states, and unless there's an illiberal revolution in, I don't know, Germany, which, seeing the way the ADF is going, seeing something in Saxony, isn't too unlikely, but definitely not to the degree or the speed it would need to happen to do that. Poland better be Warsaw better be really trying to make it up to Moscow, trying to put aside past grievances, or else it's not going to end well for him.
Yeah, we shouldn't be surprised. The last two gay marches have been marred with with incidences, and they've been broadcasted, and Polish people are not happy about them. And they literally need paramilitary to to protect the protesters, half of which aren't even Polish. They're visiting,
Yeah,
but
they're
it's the way
foreign
the empire.
transplants or whatever.
Yeah, they're
As
Germans,
often
they're
as
Austrians,
as the case
French, British.
in the Japanese Pride parades, where 60% of them are pretty much just white people.
Right. And basically it's a demonstration of power. It lets you know that America's in charge. Um, so yeah, it isn't boding well for them. They really should have jumped on, like, there's nothing that they disagreed with Orban, but they ignored taking his learning from his tactics and overall strategy, right? In the same way that Turkey learned what its strategy for survival would mean, and it would mean closer ties with Russia.
I do have to say, just to close out this topic before we move on to some of the last ones we have, which I'll probably strike out a couple just because we went on a little long with this, but that's aside the point. On paper, I would have expected Poland to make up with Russia before I would have expected Hungary to. That's all I'm going to say on that.
Hmm. Yeah, interesting. I can understand why. Yeah.
Now, moving on in terms of U.S. troop deployments, which was the catalyst for this conversation, the U.S. has decided to move 5,000 troops into Saudi Arabia mainly and other Gulf states. Now, if I recall correctly, one of the big talking points in 2000 was 9/11 happened. Bin Laden said it's because we had American troops in the Holy Land. Oh boy, how have times have changed, where you have the most fundamental Sunnis saying, more so Wahhabis than Sunnis as a whole, saying we need American troops to protect us from Iranian aggression and and Yemeni aggression. So it is a bit of an interesting turn to see. Now, this is of course after the recent chaos in the Gulf. Of course, the seizing oil tankers just blowing up, and all the fun sort of things we expect, and of course the recent missile attacks. Now, whether those came from Yemen or Iran or Iraq, we still don't know at this point. Still so much BS flying around in terms of that, but yeah, it's no surprise that the U.S. is moving troops there. Now, if this would have happened, just to put it in perspective, this would have happened like in 1990. It would have been like a Gulf War situation where you'd had every country in NATO and every quote unquote civilized nation having troops there to defend Saudi Arabia from foreign aggression, to defend the world oil supply, whatever. But it is interesting that something that would have mustered a much larger U.S. response even 10 years ago has only warranted 5,000 troops.
Right. It's not the response people were predicting, is it? Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this before that um, you know, this isn't even the year to begin a war with Iran. Um, yeah, I don't mean to harp on about Poland. I just wanted to make one tiny little comparison between Poland and Germany. And that is, at the height of the Cold War, America had about a quarter million American soldiers stationed in Germany, and tens and tens and tens of thousands of these men eventually, married German women, and there was this, the Americanization of Germany began
Yeah,
in
there's actually a
that
lot of
way.
Anglo Germans too, like in southern Germany, where the RAF was based out of. You hear a lot about them. They're an odd bunch. They're like the most hyper liberal people you ever meet, and it's like the worst of their two ethnicities coming together. Funny enough, but yeah, I know what you're saying. Like,
Right.
and yeah, you're seeing a lot of those like mixed German American families based on how just the sheer quantity of troops we had there, and of course their interaction with the locals. Things happen.
Yeah, and I have no doubt that this is anticipated, and we shouldn't be surprised. In the next 2 years, there's going to be a gay Polish man that falls in love with a gay American soldier, and there'll be a hubbub about it. And I kid you not, you will find this. This will happen.
What would the headline be? Queer and fighting Russian aggression.
It'll be something like. Polish church refuses to marry, Polish American couple, and it'll be two men, Buttigieg furious.
Yeah, yeah. Of
But
course,
but
yeah.
that's what they're really in for. That's what they're really in for, long term.
President Pete Buttigieg. Yeah, I can't say it. He just has the like perfect gay Frenchman last name, but he'll be like, marry this couple. Like yeah, Reagan's tear down this wall. Marry this couple.
Yuck! Oh man, black pilled again.
Climate
Yikes!
change. 12 years too much. But just to close out the show, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but apparently the UK courts have ordered that Parliament can sit again. That Boris Johnson's moves were not authorized under his power as prime minister, trying to get the monarch to come in and like temporarily dissolve Parliament in order to push through Brexit. So Boris has been dealt a loss in that sense. He's still refusing to hold an election despite the fact that the Conservatives have lost their majority. So it'll definitely be interesting. Of course, he's still harping on like hard Brexit, no matter what, whether it's a hard Brexit, whether it's a deal Brexit. October 31st, we're sticking to that deadline. So again, it's just the typical chaos you'd expect out of this situation. It's been almost 3.5 years. We're just I think we're at 3.25 years since I think today's the exact date, the 24th. So I'm not surprised. Will they get out? I,
Yeah,
I think Boris, for once, despite all his faults, might actually have the resolve to throw his country out, even if it is to a short-term detriment. But he, despite the fact that he will survive this and he hasn't resigned, it's still a blow to his public image and to his political capital. The fact that the courts shut him down like that.
right. And you could almost predict it would that it would go the ruling would go the way it did. I didn't expect 11 out of 11, but it was a unanimous decision. Uh, Jean-Claude Juncker came out today saying that borders will go up immediately, and this also is the case for Ireland. And that's a touchy spot for Britain. Uh, Boris has wanted to, you know, put this on the back burner and not have to deal with it right away to have a transitional period. But yeah, I do think like there will be a hard Brexit. Now, what happens between now and then is still up in the air. I won't say 100% it will happen, but my guess is it will. But what happens on the streets, especially on the streets of London, is that as it approaches, I think, who knows? Will it dwarf what's happening in Hong Kong? I don't know.
That is a real possibility. Now, one thing I am expecting out of this Brexit fiasco, especially if the border goes up, like Juncker was saying, I expect a lot of the Eurocrats to call on Northern Ireland and Scotland to hold the referendums.
Yeah.
I see them trying to use that against the UK, since Scotland has pretty much already said, "Oh, we're going to hold a referendum." They said that after Brexit, and the EU said you'll immediately have a seat at the table if you do. And of course, if Northern Ireland joins Ireland, that'll make them part of the EU just by default. So I see, especially in Northern Ireland, the EU agitating for independence referendums. I could see like them visiting
Hmm.
even like the border, like the hard border, saying, "Oh, to the people of Northern Ireland, to the people of Belfast, you must declare your independence. You must reunite with your home country," and say to the Scots, "You must determine your own destiny," which will be a bit ironic coming from them, but whatever. And as I said several months ago, that you want to increase British English nationalism, start agitating for independence in these regions, these specifically, of course, Northern Ireland and Scotland, that are guaranteed referendums under British law. Start agitating for it, and you'll see a lot of English pride return. So,
Hmm.
arguably
Hmm.
that could be for the best for everyone involved. again, this is all just speculation, but as time goes on, I see the union of these countries that have been the United Kingdom for about the past 300 or so years. It seems more and more untenable by the day. Like, you look at voting patterns, you look at who they vote for, you look at all these different things. I don't see how
It's been
this can survive going forward.
I agree, and you could look at this process already taking place post World War II. Everything from you know small groups in Wales and Scotland learning Celtic, their native Celtic languages again, little things developing, and this tends to happen. World War II marks the definitive moment where Britain was no longer an empire. Everything thereafter would be inevitable. Handing over Hong Kong is merely one of them. The Egypt, the crisis in Egypt in the 50s. It was, America had several times demonstrated who really was in charge of the Western world and half the world for that matter. And, this apparent weakness, of course, all these, um, all these smaller polities that made up Great Britain, these other ethnicities, they see the weakness, and they're going. I mean, there's of people can say, of course, people in Cornwall have always wanted to separate, but that seems like a stronger possibility now. It's not going to happen. I don't predict it's going to happen, but I agree with you. The big chunks like Scotland, for instance, Scotland becoming independent is absolutely a possibility, a very strong possibility in the next 10 years.
Yeah, I would give it an even higher possibility, especially with the border situation, to Northern Ireland,
Yeah.
because the EU is really they look. I know that the EU is run by total fools, but even they have to see if they want to play this game, they can wage again a war of attrition against the Irish, saying, "Don't you want to be reunited with your countrymen? Don't you want to be reunited with your folk? Just have them vote. Just have them vote to join us in the European Union and become one Irish nation again." I even more than Scotland, I think they're really going to play that up.
Hmm. It's possible. I mean, has is Ireland able to do that? Can they overlook, their cultural differences between Protestantism and Catholicism? You know, of course, the Protestants were basically Scotsmen that were brought there. Um, it's possible. It's possible. Um, my own humble opinion is that it's the likelihood in Scotland will even edge it out because that dichotomy doesn't exist. The Catholics in Glasgow just aren't going to, object. They have no that issue that arose in Ireland didn't exist in Scotland for the last 150
Yeah,
years.
so
So
somebody made an old joke. In Ireland, Catholics and Protestants are killing each other, while in Scotland, whether you're Catholic or Protestant depends on which soccer team you support, or of course football for our European audience. I just force habit, whatever. I think the joke stands.
yeah.
But I did, yeah. It really shows the contrast, and yeah, yeah, it will be. I mean, we talked about a post-Israel world a few weeks ago, but we may be looking at a post-United Kingdom world, which would be odd, especially considering the fact, yeah, Israel's existed for less than a century. United Kingdom existed and dominated the world for about a century. It existed for 2 centuries before that, but it will it will be odd to see what will likely be a post-United Kingdom world in my lifetime, at least.
Mhm.
Maybe not for our older audience and contributors to this program. They may not. But that's aside the point. I have no other stories for today, so unless you saw any really pertinent news items, I suppose I can draw it to a close.
Yeah, that's it for me.
So thank you for everyone tuning into the War Report. Good thing we're ending it now because apparently I'm losing my ability to speak. But thank you everyone for tuning in. It's been quite the episode. We went off on quite a few tangents. I had some more stories I was going to cover. They weren't that big. Some stuff in Egypt, North Korea, whatever. But we will see you guys next week. And
Thank you, guys.
goodbye.